We'll start in Exodus 18. We'll read it, walk through it. Now Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law. Stop right there. In this chapter, the name Jethro occurs 7 times, and this passage has closure. Look at the last verse of it. Then Moses bade his father-in-law farewell, and he went his way into his own land. So the chapter division is absolutely right here in chapter 18. Starts with Jethro coming, ends with Jethro leaving. So Jethro occurs 7 times. We've seen in Exodus over and over again that the main theme of a passage is in this book. The key word is going to be repeated 7 times. It happens, this must be the 20th or 30th time we've seen it here in Exodus. Here it is again. And the expression father-in-law is literally wife's father. In Hebrew, you have a distinction between a husband's father, which would be the father-in-law for a woman, and wife's father, which is the father-in-law for the husband. And this is literally wife's father. And the word wife's father occurs 13 times in this chapter, and the divisions are important. Up to verse 12, where Jethro leads the people in worship, wife's father occurs 8 times. And then in verse 13, we have the story of Jethro meeting with Moses and telling him to organize the people better than he'd organized them, and the word occurs 5 times there. And that's significant because the organization is going to be leaders of 10s and 50s and 100s and 1000s, and these are people who came out of Israel marching 5 in a rank. That is a group of 5, half of a squad. So this number 5 occurs in the Bible over and over again as the number of strength and organization. It shows up throughout the tabernacle, as we'll see. And again, the numerical structure seems to be important. We'll notice that as we read. These words keep repeating as if God had Moses make sure that he got in the word the right number of times. The emphasis, I think, on wife's father is important. I've got it down here in your notes. God gave Eve to Adam. Jethro gave Zipporah to Moses. And it should be the case that the wife's father has a position of spiritual leadership, not absolute in a family. For this cause a man leaves his father and mother. Obviously the wife leaves her father and mother and cleaves. We see that in Genesis. People literally moved away from where their families had been. But still there is spiritual headship here that Jethro exercises over Moses, as he always has. So now we'll read on with that in mind. Jethro, priest of Midian, Moses' wife's father, heard of all that God had done for Moses and for Israel his people, how the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. Jethro is called a priest. He'll act as a priest, a Melchizedek type priest, one superior to Aaron. And notice the words for God here. He'd heard what God had done for Moses and for Israel, and how Yahweh had brought Israel out of Egypt. And especially in Exodus, where the word Yahweh is being focused on, and it means the covenant-keeping God, the God who keeps the promises made to the fathers. When you have in a passage like this an alternation between the words Elohim, God, and the word Yahweh, covenant-keeping Lord, that alternation back and forth is important there for a reason. And here it would seem to be Jethro is a Gentile believer. He sees what God has done, God Most High. And he also sees that God, acting as Yahweh, as the covenant-keeping God, has brought Israel out of Egypt. And that's the stress there, the double stress. Jethro, Moses' wife's father, took Moses' wife Zipporah after he'd sent her away. We're not told any time that he had sent her away, but the commentators assume, and this is completely reasonable, that after the incident at the inn, where God tried to kill Moses' son and Zipporah circumcised him, then that would have incapacitated those young men, and probably Moses sent them back at that time to wait until they came out of Egypt. So now they're being reunited. And then we're told that she brought her 2 sons, one of whom was named Gershom, which means stranger. For he said, I have been a sojourner, stranger, in a foreign land. And the other was named Eliezer, or El-Azer, God is help. For he said, the God of my father was my help and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. Now both of these names are significant in context. What's interesting is, if you look back at Exodus 2:22, we've already been told the name of the firstborn son. Exodus 2:22 says, she gave birth to a son, and he named him Gershom, a stranger here, for he said, I've been a sojourner in a foreign land. Now, here at this point, what does Gershom's name mean? What is the foreign land in Exodus 2:22? I have been a sojourner in a strange land. What strange land is Moses sojourning in at this point? I'll give you a clue. It's not Egypt. It's the land of Midian. That's where he is. He's left Egypt. He's fled from Pharaoh, and he's living in Midian with Zipporah, and he says he is sojourning in a strange land. Now, it's repeated here, and you begin to see a double entendre, that in Exodus 18, what would be the emphasis? What's the strange land that he's been a sojourner in and he's now been delivered from? Egypt. So you see a double meaning here, and so it's repeated here with a new import. And verse 4 would be the same. Back when he was living in Midian, he names the son Eliezer, which means God is my help, and for God has delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. Did God deliver Moses from the sword of Pharaoh when Moses fled to Midian in the first place 40 years ago? Yeah, because Moses had killed an Egyptian and the word was known, and Moses said, surely Pharaoh is going to come after me. So he flees to Midian, and he names his second son, God has helped me and delivered me from Pharaoh. Now 40 years later, God has delivered not only Moses, but all of Israel from Pharaoh. This repeats itself, you see. And now what Moses did as the head, now the body politic has the same experience. Just as Jesus has done things as our head, and in union with him, we follow behind. So now Moses has come out, and the people have come out, and they've been delivered a second time. So the name Eliezer has a stronger even meaning than before. God has delivered me. He's been delivered twice. It says in verse 5, Then Jethro, Moses' wife's father, came with his sons and his wife to Moses in the wilderness where he was camped at the Mount of God. So we've come to Mount Sinai, and remember our geography. So we're at Mount Sinai, and these are the plains of Rephidim. Anybody remember what Rephidim means? It means plains. And we've got water flowing out of a rock here, watering the people for an entire year. The camp is out here. And we had Moses sitting on a rock over here, probably very similar to the rock that was shattered to make the water. Moses sat here. The Amalekites were defeated out here. And now Jethro comes to this same place and meets with them. So they're right at the foot of Mount Sinai, and we're all right in front of the palace of God, where God is going to come. In the presence of God, these things are taking place. So, that's where they are, out in the plains in front of the mountain. Verse 6 says, He sent word to Moses, I, your father-in-law, Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and her 2 sons with her. Seems very repetitious when you read this through. Verse 2, Jethro, Moses' wife's father, took Moses' wife Zipporah after he sent her away and her 2 sons. Verse 5, Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came with his sons and his wife to Moses. Verse 6, He sent word to Moses, I, your father-in-law, Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and 2 sons with her. Verse 7, Then Moses went out to meet his father-in-law, and he bowed down and kissed him. So the repetition seems to be to emphasize who Jethro is and to emphasize this relationship of spiritual headship that Jethro is going to exercise as a Melchizedek type priest, as a Gentile priest, superior to Aaron. Moses, verse 7 says, went out to meet his father-in-law. He bowed down and kissed him. Probably this happened whenever people met, but it's emphasized here. And again, to emphasize the spiritual headship of Jethro, which is such an important factor in this narrative. And so he acknowledges Jethro's leadership. He kisses him on the neck. And they ask each other of their welfare. My translation says they asked each other of their welfare. Does anybody have a different word for welfare there? In one of the inferior translations some of you are using. Is that what you all have? They asked each other of their welfare? Well, the word there is literally the word peace. They asked each other of their peace. Shalom. That's an important theme in here. We're going to have peace offerings. We're going to have laws that make for peace. And the contrast here is between the Amalekites who came for war and Jethro who comes for peace. And it's deliberate. And we'll see that in a couple of minutes. So, peace is the theme here. They ask each other about peace, and they went into the tent. Now, you just read that and you think, what tent is that? Moses' tent, they went in to have a chat. Actually, the tent is the place where God was meeting with Moses. They already had some type of tent that was the tent of meeting, but it wasn't the tabernacle. The tabernacle is not going to be set up for about a year. Remember the story. Moses goes up on the mountain, and he gets the 10 Commandments, And he also gets all the rules for how to build the tabernacle. And he comes down and the people are worshiping the golden calf. They've already made a tabernacle, and it's the wrong kind. It's got this calf. So he breaks the Ten Commandments. He goes back up for 40 more days, and he gets another copy of the Ten Commandments. Then he comes down, and it takes him 6 months to build the tabernacle. And we get to year 2, the first day of the second year. A year after they come out of Egypt, the tabernacle is built, sacrifices start, and everything that's in Leviticus starts up. And that'll be at the end of the book of Exodus. But this hadn't happened yet, so there's not yet this elaborate tabernacle where God meets with the people. And the tabernacle was a place that only the priest could go into. Moses, from what we know, was not supposed to go into it. Jethro would not have gone into it. So this is not that tent. But if you look at Exodus chapter 33, verse 7, you'll see that they already had a tent that was being used in a similar way. Exodus 33:7. This is right after the golden calf and 6 months before the tabernacle is built. It says, Moses used to take the tent and pitch it outside the camp, a good distance from the camp, and he called it the tent of meeting. And it came about that everyone who sought Yahweh would go out to the tent of meeting that was outside the camp. And it came about when Moses went out to the tent, all the people would rise and stand each at the entrance of his tent and gaze after Moses till he entered the tent. And it came about whenever Moses entered the tent, the pillar of cloud would descend and stand at the entrance of the tent. And Yahweh would speak with Moses. When all the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the entrance of the tent, all the people would rise and worship each at the entrance of his own tent. You see? Probably the word the tent occurs 10 times in that paragraph, or 7 rather, but I'm not going to count it up right now. But you can see that there was already a tent of meeting. Now in Exodus 18, this tent is where Moses is holding court. This is the place where people are bringing all their disputes to. This is the place where Moses sits from morning till night handling all the problems that these people have. This is the tent that Moses and Jethro went into, and it's the tent which was the central tent. And it's the place where God would meet with them, and in this case, Jethro meets with them. So the tent is important. And it's only as we read further in Exodus that it's unpacked for us what's involved with it, but that's why it refers to the tent here, and we just kind of have to figure out as we read what it is. It's not just any tent. Verse 8, Moses told his wife's father all that Yahweh had done for Pharaoh. This is chapter 18, verse 8 again. What he'd done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardship that had befallen them on the journey. No bad water, and then no bread, and then no water, and then the Amalekites. And how Yahweh had delivered them every time. Jethro rejoiced over all the goodness that the Lord had done to Israel in delivering them from the hand of the Philistines. Jethro said, Blessed be Yahweh, who delivered you from the hand of the Egyptians and from the hand of Pharaoh, and who delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know Yahweh is greater than the gods. And then we got to get a perfected translation. Indeed, in the things they arrogated to themselves. Now we'll come back to that. So, what happens here? Well, you may remember back in the Joseph story that every time something good happened to Joseph, every time something good happened to Jacob, it says that Pharaoh's servants rejoiced. You always see Pharaoh's servants off the side smiling every time Joseph's family is blessed or something, because that fulfills the Abrahamic covenant. Way back in the Abrahamic covenant, in Genesis 12, verse 3, you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. The one who curses you, I will curse. And so we have it here. These people are rejoicing and blessing Israel. Jethro is. He's happy. And that contrasts with the Amalekites who cursed Israel and who were destroyed. And that'll be the contrast when we get to it in a minute. But here the Gentiles rejoice. Jethro worships God. He blesses God. Then in verse 11 he says, Now I know that Yahweh is greater than all the gods. Now that doesn't mean that he didn't already know that. It's clear that Jethro was a God-fearing worshiper of God Most High. He knew who Yahweh was. He's like Melchizedek and all the other Gentile priests who were faithful. It just means now it's confirmed. Now I know really has the strength of now it's confirmed. It's that strong sense of know that like Adam knew his wife, or the word foreknowledge, which means really calling or election. Now it's confirmed that Yahweh is greater than all the gods. In what respect? And here the Hebrew is a little bit difficult to translate, but this is really, I think, the best translation for the second half of the verse. I'll read the whole verse. Now I know that Yahweh is greater than all the gods, indeed, in the things they arrogated to themselves. Indeed, in the precise qualities that the gods claimed for themselves, in each of those qualities, Yahweh is better, is greater. Yahweh exceeds each god in his area of supposed specialty. But that's what it means. That you take each of these gods, one god is the god of fertility, one god is the sun god, one god is the god of water, the Nile god, for instance. Well, Yahweh has shown himself more powerful than the Nile god, the god of water, probably a goddess. He's killed that by turning it to blood, and then when Israel got out in the wilderness, he made bitter water sweet and gave them water out of a rock. And he showed himself more powerful than the frog god, and he showed himself more powerful than each of these gods. We don't really know for sure what each of these gods claimed for himself, but no matter what specialty each god had, Yahweh was greater in that particular area. And that's part of what all the things we've read about so far is designed to show. This God over here is the one who claims to protect young boys. Well, God is the one who has shown, Yahweh has shown that he can protect the young boys and that God can't. Whatever. That's what Jethro means. That point by point, Yahweh has shown himself to be the true God and all the rest are fakes. And now the climax of this section, Jethro, Moses' wife's father, took a burnt offering and sacrifices, which means peace offering, for God. And Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses' wife's father before God. So this is a religious meal in God's presence. It's based on sacrifices. The word bread there just means food. And we have two kinds of sacrifices. We have the ascension offering, which the whole animal is taken, killed, cut up, put on the fire, and ascends the smoke as a soothing aroma to God. And then we have what's called a sacrifice. Your Bible will translate it that way, and that refers to the peace offering. And what's distinctive about the peace offering is that part of the animal ascends as smoke to God, but part of it is shared as a communion meal. So first of all, you have the sacrifice of consecration and dedication, where the whole person dedicates himself to God and God is pleased to accept him. And then you have the peace offering, where you share a meal with God, and it's Jethro who leads in this. Now that's important. You'll remember back from Genesis that when Abraham came out, after Abraham had defeated the Gentiles, remember Abraham came out of Egypt after Pharaoh tried to take Abraham's wife. Abraham comes out of Egypt in chapter 12 and 13. Then in chapter 14 we have all these kings fight, and Abraham defeats them and gets Lot and brings him back. So those are the Amalekites. That's the Amalekite attack. And then who does Abraham encounter? Melchizedek, the priest of Jerusalem, priest king. And Abraham gives him the tithes and recognizes his superiority. And the author of Hebrews makes a big deal out of this. He says, now this Melchizedek, his priesthood is not based on genealogies. It's a direct call from God. And so he represents Christ because his priesthood is superior to Aaron. And Abraham gave tithes to Melchizedek, which showed that the Abrahamic calling was subordinate to the Melchizedekal priesthood. And the Aaronic priests who come from Abraham are subordinate to Melchizedek. Jethro is this same type of priest. Jethro's priesthood is not something that's based on genealogies. It's based on the direct call of God. So he's another Melchizedek. And the fact that he leads Aaron in worship and that he's a Gentile shows, once again, reiterates the point here that there's a higher priesthood than that of Aaron. And so Jethro is a type of Christ at this point. If Christ is a greater Melchizedek, then he's also the greater Jethro. And Moses and Aaron are in submission to him. And Jethro sets a nation up, as we're about to see. Tells them how to organize their government. Tells them how to teach the law. This is a good guy here. So that's the stress. Right here at the beginning of Israel's call, it's made clear that Israel has a subordinate purpose in world history. And we kind of have to say this against our dispensational friends, because they tend to make Israel the center of history and the Gentiles second. And other people do too. There are postmills who do the same thing. But in the Bible itself, Israel had a special calling to minister to the nations, and that calling lasted from Abraham to Jesus. And it goes from Moses to Jesus in a special way. And that was their calling, but the broader purpose was always the salvation of all the world. The broader priesthood was always that of Melchizedek, who was both priest and king. And Jethro is both tribal leader and priest. So he has that kind of priesthood and leadership. And that's emphasized here again so that they don't forget that their calling is to minister to the nations. Now we go to the next paragraph, which won't require us to look at it in some much detail. It came about the next day that Moses sat to judge the people. Now this would be at the tent. And the people stood around Moses from morning till evening. Now when Moses' wife's father saw all that he was doing for the people, he said, "What is this that you're doing for the people? Why do you sit and all the people stand about you from morning till evening?" Remember, there's 2 million Israelites here, plus we don't know how many Gentile converts and sojourners who've gone along. There could be as many as 4 million people here. And there are a lot of disputes. And there were obviously informal judges and people who would settle some of these disputes, but an awful lot of them were getting up to Moses. And it was taking him all day long. And Moses' father-in-law says, "Why do you sit and all the people stand about you from morning till evening?" Verse 15, Moses said to his wife's father, "Because the people come to me to inquire of God." And there are 2 things here, verse 16. First of all, when they have a matter, when they have a thing, he comes to me and I judge between a man and his neighbor. And second, I make known the statutes of God and His laws. So there are 2 problems here that need to be solved. What are they? 2 things are occupying all of Moses' time and preventing him from spending any time with Zipporah and his kids. What are they? First of all, he's having to act as judge for everybody. And second of all, he's having to act as teacher. He has to teach the law to everybody all the time. So this is taking up all his time, and we got 2 problems here, and Moses needs help in these 2 areas. We notice that these 2 things are linked here in terms of Jethro, and then there's a third thing that we'll see that Moses has learned in this passage. We'll come back to it. But right now it says, when they have a dispute, when they have a thing. This word thing is very general in Hebrew, and it is sometimes in our language as well. You may remember from your Icelandic history that the council of the Icelanders in the Middle Ages was called the All-Thing. When the All-Thing met around the year 1000 and decided from now on Iceland will be Christian. And if you read the Icelandic sagas, they're always talking about people going to the All-Thing and the decisions made by the All-Thing. Well, you can see what this word means. All the important matters that had to be dealt with were taken up here at the All-Thing. Really, this word thing in Hebrew is used the same way. That's why your Bible translates it as a dispute or a judgment or a matter. It's a very general term. Well, Moses' father-in-law in verse 17 says, "The thing that you're doing is not good. You will surely wear out both yourself and these people who are with you, for the task is too heavy for you. For the thing is too heavy for you. You cannot do it alone." So you're not only going to wear yourself out, but the people are going to start getting mad too, because there's this long line of people, and you're not going to be able to see them all in a timely fashion. There won't be any speedy justice, and people are going to start to really gripe about it. And you've got enough trouble with grumbling already, don't you? And so we don't need to multiply it by having a top-heavy centralized government. So Jethro, as a good Republican, gives him counsel. Now listen to me, verse 19. I mean Republican in the general sense, not Republican Party. Somebody who believes in the rule of law and the distribution of powers. Verse 19, Jethro says, "Listen to my voice. I will give you counsel." Now remember who this is. This is a Melchizedek priest. This is a Gentile godly man, Moses' wife's father. He has spiritual leadership in the kingdom of God and over Moses, and so he gives Moses counsel. "And God be with you. You be the people's representative before God, and you bring the disputes to God. Then teach them the statutes and laws, and make known to them the way in which they are to walk, and the work they are to do." So, Moses will be the main lawgiver, but he will have to teach others who can multiply this information on down. Then, the other problem, furthermore, verse 21, "You shall select, you shall see out of the people able men who fear God, men of truth, those who hate dishonest gain, and you will place them as leaders of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens. And let them judge the people at all times, and let it be that every major thing they will bring to you, but every minor thing they themselves will judge. And it will be easier for you, and they will bear the burden with you. If you do this thing, and God commands you, then you will be able to stand. And all this people also will go up to their place in peace." So there's an idea of peace emphasized here. So he had two problems in verse 16. Moses was judge, and Moses had to teach the word, the laws. Now the resolution in verses 19 and 20, Moses will teach the laws, and this will be passed down the chain of information. And in verse 21 to 22, Moses will be the supreme judge, but there will be lower courts. What kind of literary structure did I just describe? It's chiastic. We went from judge to teacher to judge. Preach on verse 21 and say that judges and teachers should be those who fear God, who are afraid to do what they want to do, and who have a proper fear of God, men of truth, those who are willing to say what needs to be said, and those who can't be bribed. The Bible forbids taking a bribe. It doesn't forbid offering one, because sometimes you wind up in a situation where the only way to get any type of safety and security is to give a bribe. I mean, I can just imagine some of these third world countries you could get in a situation in an airport or someplace where they're not going to let you out, and you've got to pass around a whole bunch of money to be let out. Well, the Bible lets you do that, but the Bible forbids them to require it. So practically speaking, there's a difference there. Of course, a Christian is not going to go try to bribe a judge to do something dishonest, but you can, if you're in a wicked situation, use a bribe to get out of trouble, to get home or something like that. But the Bible forbids people to take bribes. And so the judges here are those who hate dishonest gain and who can't be bought off. And these are the ones who were set up as leaders of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. Now, finish out the passage, verse 24. So Moses listened to his wife's father, did all that he had said. Moses chose able men out of all Israel and made them heads over the people, leaders of thousands, leaders of hundreds, leaders of fifties, and leaders of tens. And they judged the people at all times. A difficult dispute they would bring to Moses, but every minor dispute they themselves would judge. Then Moses bade his father-in-law farewell, and he went his way into his own land. As we'll see in a moment, not everybody went back. Some of them stayed. Now, if we look at the next page in our notes, we'll take what time is left and look at some of the broader things that are pointed to here, and what, in addition to these specifics, we can learn in the passage. First of all, let's look in the Bible to see who Jethro is, and how the story of Jethro fits in to what we've already looked at. I'll just quickly read through these passages. To remind you, Genesis 25, verse 2, that the Midianites were descendants of Abraham. Genesis 25, now Abraham took another wife whose name was Keturah, and she bore him Zimran and Jokshan and Medan and Midian, and Ishbak and Shua. So Bildad the Shuhite in the book of Job is a descendant of Abraham. And so is Jethro the Midianite. Now Jethro, in Exodus chapter 2, verse 16, is called the priest of Midian. The priest of Midian had 7 daughters. And verse 18, when they came to Reuel, their father, he said, "Why have you come back so soon today?" And Moses married one of them daughters. And then chapter 3, verse 1, Moses was pasturing the flock of Jethro, his wife's father, the priest of Midian. So Reuel is another name for Jethro. Same guy. Now if we look forward to Numbers chapter 10, verses 29 to 32, we'll see something more about these guys. Reuel is Jethro. You see that this is a jigsaw puzzle here, is what we're working on, because we're going to have to get a lot of little details to get a picture. But Numbers 10:29 says, "Then Moses said to Hobab, the son of Reuel, the Midianite, Moses' father-in-law." So Hobab is Moses' brother-in-law, Zipporah's brother. Moses says to him, "We're setting out to the place that Yahweh said, I will give it to you. Come with us, and we will do you good. For Yahweh has promised good concerning Israel." But Hobab said to him, "I will not come, but will rather go to my own land and relatives." Then he, Moses, said, "Please do not leave us, inasmuch as you know where we should camp in the wilderness, and you will be as eyes for us. So it will be, if you will go with us, it will come about that whatever good Yahweh does for us, we will pass it on to you." Thus they set out from the mount of Yahweh. Now that tells us that Hobab went along. So we read that Jethro, or Reuel, went back to continue to be the king and priest of these good Midianites. But one of his sons, Hobab, and his clan joined Israel. Now, do any of you know what race of people these were? We call them Midianites, but they have another name. Boy, you've really got to know the Bible to get this one. This is even tougher than naming the 5 daughters of Zelophehad. This is the problem here. All these people have more than one name. Jethro is Reuel, And they have a son named Hobab. And we're looking at Midianites, a good Midianites. There are also bad ones. Remember the Midianite women who got involved with the Israelites? These people, these good ones, are also known as Kenites. Let me show that to you. That's in Judges 1. So we'll continue to flip forward to Judges 1, verse 16. We come to this salient verse. And the sons of the Kenite, Moses' wife's father, went up from the city of palms, that's Jericho, with the sons of Judah to the wilderness of Judah, which is south of Arad, and they went and lived with the people. So Hobab and his people, Jethro, they're also known as Kenites, and the Kenites who continued and stayed with Israel, they joined the tribe of Judah, and they lived with the Judahites. And thus they experience all the blessings of Judah. When David comes to the throne, they're in that royal tribe. When the nation divides north and south, they're in the good part. When the nation comes back from captivity, they're among the ones who come back from captivity. So these Kenites, God has put them in the best position. In chapter 4, verse 11, this is said to us again even more specifically. We read about a bad Kenite who has a good wife. Judges 4:11 says, Now Heber, the Kenite, has separated himself from the Kenites, from the sons of Hobab, the brother-in-law of Moses. That's really what it implies. And had pitched his tent as far away as the oak in Zaanannim, which is near Kadesh. But he had a wife named Jael, who decided to side with Israel. So that's who these Kenites are. Now flip forward to 1 Samuel 15, verse 6, and we'll see something really interesting. Now look at this. 1 Samuel 15, 6. Now I'll just start in verse 1. Then Samuel said to Saul, Yahweh sent me to anoint you as king over his people, over Israel. Now therefore listen to the words of Yahweh. Thus says Yahweh of hosts, I will punish Amalek for what he did to Israel. Now go and strike Amalek. Verse 5. Saul came to the city of Amalek and set an ambush in the valley, and Saul said to the Kenites, Go, depart, go down from among the Amalekites, lest I destroy you with him, for you showed kindness to all the sons of Israel when they came out from Egypt. So the Kenites departed from among the Amalekites. So Saul defeated the Amalekites. Now, what does that do? It puts the Kenites next to the Amalekites, doesn't it? Now think back to what we're studying in Exodus. What did we see in Exodus 17? Amalekites. What do we see in Exodus 18? Kenites. So the contrast is there very dramatically. The bad Gentiles who attack Israel, Amalekites. The good Gentiles who bless Israel, Kenites. And they're put together. And very specifically here in 1 Samuel 15, verse 6. And with that in mind, we can look back at Numbers 24. This will be the last verse that shows us this connection. And that explains to us what Balaam says under divine inspiration. The reluctant prophet Balaam, Numbers 24, verse 20. Balaam looked at Amalek and took up his discourse and said, Amalek was the first of the nations, but his end is destruction. And he looked at the Kenite and took up his discourse and said, Your dwelling place is enduring. Your nest is set in the cliff, in the rocks, in other words. Ken shall surely not be destroyed until Asher takes you captive. All right? So, Amalekites and Kenites. One to be destroyed, one to be saved. Reprobation and election. Good Gentiles, bad Gentiles. Now that is the overall picture. When we go back to Exodus 17 and 18, then we see even more how Moses, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, has set these passages out. Look at the notes here on page 43 that compare the two passages. There are a lot of literary indications that we're supposed to link them together. Very carefully set out in the wording of these two stories. The Amalekites came to Israel, 17 verse 8. Then Amalek came and fought against Israel. 18 verse 5. Then Jethro, Moses' wife's father, came to fight or for peace. 17:8. Amalekites came to fight. 18:7. Jethro came and they discussed peace. On the next day, they decided to fight. 17:9. Moses says, Tomorrow I will station myself on top of the hill and we'll have the battle. In the next story, it says, On the next day, Moses had to judge all day. So there the crisis comes on the next day. In both cases it lasts till sundown, we're told. The end of verse 12 in chapter 17 says Moses' hands were steady until the sun set. Chapter 18 verses 13 and 14 both say that Moses judged from morning till evening. Moses sat down to meet the crisis. You remember in both cases. Moses sits to judge, and in the Jethro story Moses sits because he's too tired. In both cases the word heavy is used. Moses' hands were heavy during the battle. And Jethro says, this burden is too heavy for you. Men were chosen to help out in both cases. The word choose is used. 17 verse 9, Moses said to Joshua, choose men for us. 18:25, Moses chose able men out of Israel and made them judges. And then finally both passages end the same way. 17:16 it says the Lord will have war against Amalek forever. 18:23 Jethro says if you do this thing the people will continue in peace on down. So the contrast and comparison is intentional. We're supposed to put these two things together and learn from them. So what can we learn? First of all, we see there are two kinds of Gentiles. Those who bless the people of Abraham and those who curse them. The one kind are rejected utterly and will be destroyed. The other kind are to be accepted. You can marry them. Moses did. You can invite them to join you, as he did with Hobab, says stay with us. Or stay in contact with us. Jethro obviously would. And you can learn wisdom from them. This is important because the book of Job is all about Gentiles. The people that are in the book of Job are not Israelites. They're all other people. Guys from Uz and Buz and, like we said, Teman. Eliphaz the Temanite. See, Teman is one of the sons of Esau. But a godly one. Obviously, Eliphaz, you read his speeches, he knew all about the true faith. He misapplied it, but he knew about it. Proverbs 31, the words of Lemuel the king. Well, Lemuel's not a king of Israel. He's a king of some other nation. Second of all, we also learn wisdom. So, the point is, these Gentiles who are believers, they have a lot to say. Now, the Pharisees in Jesus' day didn't think that way at all. They wouldn't have any contact with them, they wouldn't marry them, they wouldn't eat with them, they wouldn't go in a house with them, etc. But that's not the way it was supposed to be. Second of all, we notice what Moses learns here. Moses is the judge of Israel, like the later judges, and if you read the book of Judges, you'll see a judge was primarily a war chief who defeated the enemy, like the Amalekites, but he would also serve as the Supreme Court in a regular situation. People would come with their problems, like Deborah. It says Deborah passed judgment for 20 years when people brought their problems to her at the palm tree of Deborah. So he is prophet and Supreme Court, teacher and judge. In both capacities, Moses has to depend on God. To fight the battle, he has to hold up God's staff, and in order to be a good teacher and judge, he has to be led in sacrifice by the Melchizedekal priest. So that's emphasized. Third, in both capacities, he has to delegate to others who conduct the same functions at lower level. Fourth, it's just interesting, becomes significant at different times. Since Moses is both teacher, judge, and warrior, the organization of lower judges is also the military organization of Israel. So when we read about judges being elders over tens and fifties and hundreds and thousands, they're just copies of Moses. And Moses is also the war chief. So these are also warriors. And you see later on in Israel references to centurions and chiliarchs in battle situations. It's these same guys. You start with them marching 5 in a rank, that's half a squad. You make it 10 under a sergeant and a corporal. You've got a decurion. You've got platoons of 50, companies of 100, and brigades of 1,000. If you look at Luke 9:14, you'll see that when Jesus fed the people, he had them sit down in 50s and 100s. Shows that Jesus is a greater Jethro, and he's still organizing the kingdom. Fifth, the key aspect of holy war is prayer. Moses lifting up the staff. Thus, the elders were captains of prayer as well as teachers and judges of disputes, the same as elders today. Now, in our churches, we don't have an organization as efficient as this. But still, the idea is the same. When the New Testament talks about elders, it's pointing us back to this. Paul writes and says, select elders. What do those people think about? What do they understand an elder to be? An elder was a prayer captain, a teacher of the law, and a judge of disputes. And elders were organized with elders over tens, 50s, 100s, and thousands. Now, Presbyterians, we've got ruling elders and teaching elders, and we've got stated clerks who are kind of like elders over hundreds of thousands, but we don't do much with them. The Episcopal Church has got elders over billions and millions and tens of thousands and pastors, but they don't have any ruling elders over tens. None of the churches have got a real efficient organization. But there's a lot here, a lot of wisdom here, but we won't talk about it because time's out. Finally, let me give you one last thought and we're done. I think the order of this passage continues to be important. We discussed it last week a tad, last time. But you got to pass the Amalek test before you can really get the Kenite organization and a sound body politic. If you don't maintain the holy word of prayer, then your teaching is going to fall on deaf ears and your government and witness is going to be unstable. And I think that's the key to a lot of churches' problems, that the prayer part is weak, and as a result, the church has difficulty. And I think that the rule here is just laid out here in the way this passage is. When you come out of Egypt, God brings a test. You've got to pass through that test by prayer. You have to have that established in the church. And then when you do, then you'll have teaching and organization that works. If you don't, all that teaching and organization is just going to become a problem. You're going to have a lot of disputes that won't get settled. You'll have a lot of doctrine that goes haywire. Our time's up.